let's dive into this first. The first story I'll tell you is quickly a little story about myself, and I'll do that in the form of an infographic here on the left. I've been working in data, I think, roughly for about 40 years now, and I was very much a DBA when I was young in my career, working with DB2 when it first came out, and for a large oil and gas company here in Calgary. And I left them to work for Oracle for a number of years as an Oracle consultant, and then I started a couple of different companies to do data things, and I stumbled across in the mid 2000s some of the writings from Dan, which was Data Vault 1 at the time, and I worked with Dan here in Calgary. This is my home. It's sunny in this picture today. It's actually raining. Yesterday we had a record hot day, so we're very close to the mountains, so our weather is quite variable here in Canada, Western Canada. And when I worked with Dan, I got certified in I think about 2007 on Data Vault 1 certification, which was really focused on the modeling pieces of it. There was patterns associated with it, but it wasn't formalized that much. And then I began to work with Data Vault 2 when it came out, and with Dan, and Dan introduced me to Performance G2, and I've been teaching. I think I've taught over 800 folks the CDVP 2.0 class, which is the sort of the introductory practitioner class for Data Vault 2.0. So that's sort of my story. My story is I really fell in love with the Data Vault concept way back when. I've been using it ever since, and I'm trying to, hopefully today, I'm not trying to sell anything, so you can relax. I don't have a product to pitch. I'm just trying to share information and give you some insight into how to take the raw data that you've put into the Data Vault, and assuming that you've done that correctly, what's the best way to produce information for your use case? So some of the things and considerations that we can have around that. And I'm going to start with a story. And the story I started with, this presentation I gave to the conference in Stowe, Vermont back in May. And it starts with the story, and this is my attempt. I went to my graphics design department and had them. And then I realized, oh no, I don't have a graphics design department. I tried to use DALL-E 3 to come up with this. So that's as far as I got with it. But it's a story about a man in a balloon who looks lost. And he lowers his balloon down and sees a man on the ground and says, hey, can you tell me where I am and which way I'm heading? And the man on the ground opens up his cell phone, looks at it for a little bit and says, sure, you're at 44 degrees, 28 minutes, 28.9 seconds north, 72 degrees, 42 minutes, 39.5 degrees west, and you're 250 meters above sea level, which happens to be the coordinates of the Stowe Snowflake Resort where the conference was being held. Right now you're hovering but on your way here, your moving speed was 1.83 meters per second at a 1.929 gradient. And the man in the balloon looked back and say, well, yeah, okay, thanks. But by the way, are you a data professional? And the man on the ground said, yes, I am. But how did you know? And the man in the balloon said, well, everything you told me is completely accurate. You gave me more detail than I needed, and you told me in such a way that it is no use to me at all. And so the man on the ground says, dang, oh, by the way, are you a business executive? And the man in the balloon says, yes. I said, wow, how did you know that? And the man on the ground said, well, you don't know where you are. You don't know where you're going. You got where you are by blowing hot air. And you start asking questions after you got into trouble, and you're exactly the same spot you were a few minutes ago, but somehow now it's my fault. And that's the metaphor that I'd like to use for the differences. And it was much more entertaining to tell that joke to a live audience, but it really signifies a breakdown in communication that I think is important here. So I'm going to use that as a metaphor for the chasm, I think, that between IT and business professionals, business services, and what we are doing is a disservice to the business in some cases by focusing just on the technology. So let's look at ways in which we can shift our perspective to find out what this man in the balloon is trying to achieve by this balloon ride, and see if we can use the data that we have to help them make better decisions around optimizing what they're trying to accomplish. And that's the whole premise of today's presentation, is that we need to find out what the story is. So Data Vault 2.0, as many of you hopefully know, some of you are new to it, some of you have been using it for a long time, is comprised really of three main pillars, Dan calls them. The main pillar that really attracted me to it was the data model, because it's basically a meta model. It's a generic model where we talk about business concepts that are uniquely identifiable and their relationships. And then we save context, textual context, or any other kind of context over time with it. In an architecture, then put together the modeling with architectures that were already basically available. The architecture I characterize as the Inman architecture that uses the data warehouse as a delivery vehicle for this data. So we're going to warehouse our data in the data warehouse. And what I wanted to talk today about was a little bit more about the methodology around how we determine what to do. How do we capture the intention of the business? But let's first start with a couple of definitions. Anybody who's taken the class from me knows I'm sort of a bit of a pedantic person around getting unambiguous definitions for things. So Data Vault 2 is a system of business intelligence. And a system you can really define as a group of interacting or interrelated elements that act according to a set of rules to form a unified whole. And that's what we're really trying to get with a system of business intelligence. And we deliver that via the architecture of a data warehouse. So let's talk about what a data warehouse is briefly here, because I think that's a term that's fallen into a little bit of disrepute, I guess. I still think that the data warehouse is the correct way to terminologize this. And this is a picture actually at the conference when Bill Inman, who is one of the, was quoted back in 2008 saying the data vault is the optimal approach for modeling the enterprise data warehouse. And I believe that remains to be true. And we might call this the definition of the data warehouse. That's maybe the Lindstad-Inman version of the data warehouse. It's a subject-oriented, integrated by business key, time-variant, non-volatile collection of data in support of management's decision-making process and in support of the auditability of a system of record. So we've got a definition that we can use for the data warehouse. And I like to have these definitions and share with people that I'm working with, so that I sometimes feel like this guy in the cartoon from the Far Side, that is just trying to put labels on things so that we all know what we're talking about. But hopefully, I think the tagline in this cartoon was hopefully that clears up a few things, and hopefully that's what we're going to try and do with this. But let's talk about what we're trying to do here in terms of our first job. Job one is really to determine the why are we here? What's the intention of the business, the purpose of this entirety of our business intelligence program? And I want to move right up to the beginning of that. And if you're starting on your program, or you're midway through the program and you don't know why you're doing it, I think I would recommend that you start asking some questions and find out why. What is the business trying to do with this? And asking the right question really turns the way I phrase it now, most of the time, we used to call them requirements, and we'd write binders of requirements around what we were supposed to do. Using the Agile methodology that Dan adopted in conjunction with the Inman architecture and the data model, we now have a very tried and true way of doing that. And the Agile Manifesto and Scott Ambler and Mark Lives with Disciplined Agile Delivery really are some of the originators of some of this stuff. We have to come up with what the story is. So Data Vault 2.0, the Agile methodology, is the way to capture the intention of the business in story form. And there's a way to do that can, depending on the questions you ask, you can make it apply to a specific use case or a general program that you're embarking on for your business intelligence. And then when you talk to business leaders about this, and I'm assuming on the call here we don't have any business leaders on this call, so I think one of the things that we can do is talk amongst ourselves and realize that maybe we need to approach business leaders with better questions around what we want to do here. And really that can be done through future visioning, I guess, of what success looks like for your program. What are we trying to accomplish with this? You hear a lot in the blogosphere about failure in data warehousing and business intelligence and initiatives, and it turns out that it's still true that most of these exercises end in failure. And to me, there's two ways you can fail. You can fail if you don't get the right information. So if you change the data incorrectly, right, you are not auditable to the actual data that you're being asked to warehouse, then that's a fail. The other one is that you've taken too long and you're not, delivering the business value. But if you don't know how long you have to do this and what the business value is, it's hard to determine what success is. So let's spend some time and understand, what does success look like? And one technique I've seen to do this is sort of brainstorming with the business to create a press release. What would a press release look a couple of years from now if we do everything we need to do to help this business with the BI program that we've got? This is essentially the role of the business analyst, or the persona of the business analyst, which in some cases is not included in some of the projects that we've been working on. There really isn't a liaison with the business. You're in Agile world, you should have business representation and business analyst roles available to you. But in some cases, sometimes our technology professionals, which I think we are all on this call, are more data professionals, IT professionals, we're thrust into this role. So what can you do? Well, one thing you can do is you can spend, I think it was $80 for the business analyst body of knowledge. It's a book. You can go read the book about what to do and how to do it. Or I think if nothing else from this presentation, the number one tip I can give you is you can use large language modules like ChatGPT, for instance, to help you understand and formulate questions that can be used to elicit what it is the information that we're trying to achieve through this business intelligence program. So I've put a link down in the bottom here for an example for using this, but ChatGPT or the equivalents of that with a small amount of effort can give you some really good ideas of what to do and what questions to ask your business. So the first thing I've got here, the header of this slide includes the prompt that I asked ChatGPT about. And I don't expect you to read all these questions, but pick one or two of them. And I think you'll find that there's some interesting, talking points or conversation starters with your IT leaders, not your IT leaders, your business leaders, about what the value of doing this is. And using that, the other thing that ChatGPT does know a lot about is actually your business and certainly your industry. And it can give you lots of insights that you may not be thinking about and questions that you could potentially ask. And I'm going to use the balloon example here in a few minutes to give you some ideas of how that can work. Now, let's see, I've got something in the chat here. I'm not sure if I should jump into that right away or not, but let me just take a sidetrack here and see. Oh yeah, the presentation is being recorded and will be shared on on the user group website when it's done. So let's move on to what kind of questions we could ask the business. Future visioning. Here's a press release that I just asked ChatGPT to fill in. I'm not expecting you to read this, but what I want you to do is sort of realize that there's some major areas that the business is trying to optimize. And the way that they report on that optimization is often through the use of metrics or KPIs, key process indicators, of calculated values from the data to prove that we've gotten better. And that's what this business of a future press release might do. So one that you might have for a balloon, I asked ChatGPT, I said, the organization's intention involves reaching a destination on a balloon. And ChatGPT came up with a whole bunch of different ways in which we can improve our business, and then ideas for us to create information that could demonstrate how the value of that is and what the decisions we can make around that are. So what does a good development data story look like? So the first story I think you need to focus on is, why are you doing business intelligence? What are you trying to achieve? And asking that question can go a long way, as we'll see, to what type of information you're looking for. So what are the good elements of a development data story? Really, the first three are the main ones. And I like to talk about the user persona, who needs it. And I had a training years ago from a fellow named Dick Hab who drew a symbol for me that I really liked. And this is where you want to put somebody, and he drew it like this. And I apologize for my drawing, but it's putting your butt on the line. Give me somebody who has a need, and let me have their name or their position. If we don't want to have the name, we can have it in a position, but somebody's going to benefit from this and is accountable for achieving that benefit if we successfully deliver it. What that is the goal or need, and an acceptance criteria to let us know that we've done it properly. And having this available allows us to tailor what it is we're trying to do. There's other elements of a story that you can look at, but basically it's answering the different questions about the data that we've collected that we can use to understand and optimize our business. And the term that I like to use, and we've seen used in the industry quite a bit, is one of the things you want to look at is the data literacy of the organization that you're working with. So as a consultant, I go into multiple different organizations. If you're in an organization yourself, you can analyze and find out where your organization is on a series of continuums. Basically, data literacy, there's a really good project that I highlighted down here that you can utilize to measure, assess, and then put together programs in place to improve the data literacy of your organization. And the data literacy of your organization can be qualified or quantified on a bunch of different continuums, of which I'll do a couple here now. The first one is whether or not you're data-centric or decision-centric. Are you trying to manage decisions, or are you just trying to collect your data? You know, decision, really, from Cassie Kostrikov's perspective, who's one of the thought leaders in this area, and decision intelligence, is a decision is an irrevocable allocation of resources. So if you want to make an allocation of resources that you can't change later on, these are the decisions that you're trying to make, or are you just trying to gather the data? If one other criteria we can look at is your analytics use case. There's a maturity model for that as well. And then we'll look at the implementation that you're trying to do with these things. So how are you trying to implement the information that you're creating in your organization? So the first sort of maturity model that I like to talk about is this data maturity model, your data literacy. And this is a CMMI type of model, which is a 5-level model that starts at level 1, and you evolve into, you know, based on criteria, into level 5, where at level 5 you can see data is fully implemented and embedded into your decision-making process, and the organization is continuously improving its data platform to adapt and to emerging trends in technology. That is the panacea. That's the highest level of optimization from a data literacy perspective. Most organizations we deal with are at level 2 or 3, just trying to gather this data and get their hand on what's going on. There's little focus on data-driven decision-making, which is really what the overall goal of the business intelligence might be. But if you don't ask what the goal is, you don't know, right? But that to me is the goal, is to take data and make better decisions from it, and use it to help you make better decisions. So each of these levels, you can do an assessment. I've done several consulting engagements where we do the assessment, and then we ask the business leaders, where would you like the organization to be on this scale? And we can put together programs in place and specific data literacy projects to help improve the use of data in our business. The other criteria that you might want to use on a continuum is the analytic maturity model. And there's a pretty popular one out there I'll just share right now, that it starts with level 1 on that is descriptive. What is happening? All you're trying to do is gather the data and figure out what's happened. You just want the transactions that you've got in your business, and you want them with quality and accuracy. You want to figure out what's happened. And most organizations still struggle with this. This can be very difficult in a large organization with distributed management styles. Eventually, you'll start to get all the data together. The next thing you want to look at is maybe a little bit of questioning about why it happened. What's causing some of this stuff? What are the causes and effects? Is there a metric that I can put? And we call that a key performance indicator. And this is a graphic from the Key Performance Indicator Institute, so that if you don't have key performances indicators in your business, you can go to this website and they'll tell you what they are, and give you some examples in different branches of industry that are out there. ChatGPT is also good for giving you some ideas about key process indicators. They're very useful. They're calculations made from data that maybe your operational business isn't giving you directly. You need to put a soft business rule in there to come up with that calculation, and then watch that calculation as you make some changes. As you make decisions, you can sort of understand and maybe even predict what's going to happen if you make a certain decision on it, because that's the next level, is predictive. What's going to happen? And that's really where AI has started to take hold of. And this is a book by a number of individuals from the Harvard Business Review that talk about, AI is really simply prediction machines. They use past data to predict future events and future results. And then when you start getting predictions going through, the next and final, I guess, level of this analytic maturity model is get prescriptive. What should I do? What are the various options I have, and what's going to happen if I do which one that way, right? Get the crystal ball out, and let's use data to predict what's going to happen. What should I do? Where should I put my resources this year in order to reach my outcome? But we must have the story. What's the outcome? What are we trying to achieve with this? So once we've sort of assessed where we are on this continuum, we can start to also assess what our intention is to operationalize. How are we going to use this stuff? What are we going to do when we're done, when we figured this stuff out? What are we going to do with it? The first and sort of the greatest, sexiest way to do this is, embed decisions in your business operations. This is kind of the cool way to do things, and it really is cool, but it also requires a significant investment in perhaps using more of an event-based architecture, using streaming perhaps to get your soft business rules being executed more or less on the fly as things are happening in your business. Do things like policy risk assessment or fraud detection. That kind of stuff can be done in more or less real time if that's what we're trying to do with this business intelligence program, is make better decisions as we're making them. For the most part, what we see generally is people are really, they want to have the data so that they can analyze it or think about it, right? Descriptive dashboards, scorecards, that kind of thing. When I try to ask them, what are they going to do with it? They'll say, I'm going to analyze it. And then beyond that, they can't give me any more detail. They don't really know. They just want to look at it and start asking questions. So we're informating as we go with this descriptive stuff. So what we can do in our BI programs to make that more effective is focus on data quality and making sure we're mastering the data correctly. We don't have any duplicates. We don't have poor quality data that's going to lead to incorrect decisions and assumptions based on that. And that's where most people and most organizations are, frankly, in this. There's the outliers are now starting to use this in real time. What I see the unhappy face in all of this is a philosophy is build it and they will come. And that's a recipe, I think, for failure both ways, both from an IT perspective, if we just go off in isolation and build a data warehouse and then hopefully the business will come. And I've seen it the other way as well. When business people go off and build their own facilities, they lack some of the rigor around security and performance and quality around the data, which becomes problematic if the business doesn't have some of the IT rigor around this. Really, we are data professionals. We know how to use data and protect it, as well as relate it back to where it came from. So build it and they will come doesn't work. We need to work together with the business to build something together. All right, so if you've got that philosophy, I think you might want to articulate what the goals are, either from the business or from the IT. What are you trying to do? If we're trying to do an infrastructure refresh and a digital transformation to the cloud that will essentially give the business no new information, it's useful to know that, right? You can spend less time, worrying about talking to the business and find out what they're trying to do and focus on getting the goal of moving a platform from one place to another. And that's a valid reason to build a data platform initially, but eventually you're going to want to talk to the business to find out what they're trying to do with these things. All right, so let's have one more caution here, and I want to resolve, I guess, not to use data to create disinformation. And disinformation can be created intentionally or unintentionally. I'm going to assume that nobody here is intentionally creating disinformation, so we'll just push that aside. But what I want to do is make you aware that you may be unintentionally creating disinformation because as a human being, like all human beings, we have all kinds of biases, cognitive biases. We think we're making rational decisions and we're not. And if you look up the cognitive bias codex that I've shown here, you'll see a taxonomy of all the different ways that we can be wrong and are wrong in many of the things we do. So let's take an effort also to make sure that we're not using some of the biases that are built into humanity to produce information for something that we've already decided, a decision that's already made, and all we're trying to do is justify it. That's not really what we're trying to accomplish, right? Or we're trying to manipulate things into justifying something. That's really what kind of disinformation we want to be careful about. One of the main disinformations we have is called confirmation bias, and confirmation bias is a situation where the data you pick fits what you've already decided, you've already believed it. Jackpot, I understand, I've already got what I need, and that's really not what we're trying to do with this. And I put a link down there for the Canadian Information Processing Society, which I've belonged to, as a code of ethics that talk about the things that we won't do with data around that. And that's something that I think is worth considering, both unintentionally and intentionally. Obviously, intentionally we don't want to do this, but unintentionally we do this all the time. Spurious correlations can happen. There's a great site here that's got hundreds of them, and they're hilarious, right? The revenue generated and computer science doctorates are correlating very tightly. So there's no cause and effect here. Correlation does not mean causation. And Daniel Kahneman has really done lots of great stuff in here, even with flaws in human judgment. He goes through and talks about judges, the people in society that we have given the job of making decisions for us based on laws and things like that. They are inconsistent. They make mistakes. They are biased. It depends what time of day they make their judgment, whether it's before or after lunch. It's fascinating how bad our decision and how inconsistent our judicial system, and this is primarily in the US, but I think it's pretty consistent across humanity. And the last word of caution I would have is David Hand has a really good book that talks about dark data. And dark data is similar to dark energy and dark matter. It's stuff you can't see. It's the data you don't have, that you might be missing, or that you've ignored, you've missed through selection, you don't have properly defined. And he's got a taxonomy of that in there that it's also worth considering as you go through that. So once you've figured out, what you're trying to do and made sure that you've got representative data available, well, one of the things you have to understand is if the goal is this, you have to assess the data. Is this, have you got the right data to do this? Maybe we have to go out and get some data. We might have to fabricate it using machine learning or predictive things, or we might have to capture it and change the way that we do our operations. Sometimes that's the best thing to do. So in any event, what we've got now is what we talk about in PG2 is the right side of the architecture. So the architecture that we sort of draw out most of the time includes a two-part architecture in Lindstad style with a data warehouse in the middle where we have unchanged data. We haven't changed the data. We've remained auditable. We're using reversible processes to organize our data by business concept that is uniquely identifiable and the relationships those business concepts have, and time and change. So we've got all of that done. I'm going to assume you're doing that. I've just got, that is the data warehouse that you've ingested the data, you've got it. Now, what information do we need to focus on? And sometimes organizations struggle a little bit on that. So I'm going to go through the different sort of mechanisms that we have in the data vault to help get that information out, right? Data is the facts as they were at the time. The meaning of those facts is derived. It's computed. It's informated, as Susanna Zuboff says in her book. We take data and informate it, and if we persist it again, we've created more data, and that's really what we do in the data warehouse. Is we've created more data, we've organized it a little bit, we haven't changed it, and now we can begin to use it. We can start to analyze it and do analytics and experimentation on that data. So the first thing we want to do is look at the option of the business vault. The business vault, I think, is really the number one way to do this. And it's an optional layer of the architecture. And it's optional in the sense that not that you don't have to use it, you're going to want to use it. You do really want to use this. It's tightly coupled to the data that you've got in that it shares the internal keys of the raw data vault. So it's just basically a way to restructure that. And it's derived data for business purposes, either data or metadata around what you've got in your operational systems. And it's part of the information delivery area, and it's a really important part of it. It's purpose built, and it's driven by soft business rules. This is where your business gets a chance to say, I want to add these things up, and I want to take this one and divide it by this and create a key process indicator to determine whether or not I'm getting better or worse in optimizing my processes. The nice part about this, as it's based on the structure of the raw data vault, is that there's patterns available for us to automate that. So we have a way in which we can take the raw data vault and begin to create new structures that align. Essentially, you're aligning time or space, location, or the grain of the raw data inside your conceptual business, right? So that's what we're trying to do with our business vault, is prepare the data for more information extraction. It contains one or more specialized objects, either created as tables or as views. A view is simply a SQL statement that's stored as text and run when you need it. A table is, in this structure, is a SQL statement that's the results are stored in a table inside the area called the business vault. You can have those be hubs and links. You can derive your own hubs and links in the business vault as well. The number one use case I see is the pit table. The pit table is a point in time table, and it aligns multiple timelines. For context, remember, we keep multiple satellites describing something, and we integrate that into a key set. Well, the context around that is like creating a type 2 slowly changing dimension, if you know what those are. It's basically the information or data we have about the things in the business that we keep track of. A bridge table is more business key focused. It allows us to, manipulate the grain of the data, right? You can, if you've got products and you've got customers, and you don't know what products are ordered by customers because it's always through an order. In a bridge table, you can bring all those things together and begin to do some analytics on that. It's like the grain of your facts, if you want to use that analogy for the dimensional model. The other part that you see in the business vault, though, is a computed satellite. It's time-dependent derived context. So the derived context is either through selection process, so that we're mastering the data, or maybe we're calculating new data like a KPI or some sort of feature that we want to be able to use in our models. Some reference data can be pulled in. So all of this can be done in computed satellites, all in the business vault, all using references back into the raw data vault. So we minimize the amount of data. We're not keeping another copy of all the data in the business vault. We're keeping the data that we need, and only the data that we need to efficiently get this data out. A same as link is something that oftentimes can be built into the business vault because you're doing business key mastering. So you're removing duplicates through a relationship that is equivalence, essentially, with different business keys, because sometimes we have problems in our governance of business keys. With the business vault, the other thing that you can do is you can virtualize. You can virtualize, and virtualizing in this sense is using views to create your star schema. So your star schema becomes much more agile because you can express it as a term, as a view, instead of a physicalized created large table. You can create them in tables if you like, right? You run the SQL statement of the view and put the result in a table, maybe even a materialized view, but you've got the results. And this allows us to compress the timeline to getting our information out. The business vault technically belongs in what's called the information delivery area of the architecture, right? The information delivery area contains anything that the business has access to. The number one way of doing that, I think I might have skipped something here. Yes, sorry. There we go. This is where the business comes for answers, right? Information is answers to questions. And then when you write it down, that becomes data. So you can do that in many forms. The most popular form still today is the dimensional models. So the concept that Data Vault doesn't use star schemas or is against star schemas is completely, I think, incorrect. We use star schemas oftentimes to express information. What we don't use it for is the data warehouse. The data warehouse, we use the data vault, raw data vault model to store the data and make sure that it is auditable back to the source system. There's other ways, though, to produce information from your data. You don't have to use a dimensional model. You can use linked data or a knowledge graph, semantic type things that you see in the semantic web, or you can simply flatten the data. Create the big wide tables so that people can report off of it. That's fine too. Or integration hub or feature store. Make this data available to perhaps be informated later on in the process. So anything derived from raw data is used using soft business rules. So we use these business rules to apply that to the data that we've stored in the data warehouse. And that allows us some efficiencies, right? We don't need to conform our star schemas, which is one of the big challenges with star schemas as a data warehouse. It becomes unworkable over time because of the complexity. And we've sort of separated that out by decoupling our architecture, right? So we can avoid those dependencies that we might run into in long-running things. And you can use versioning. You can create versions of your star schema, compare the two, and then throw away the old version once you're satisfied that it's good. So lots of, flexibility comes from this. So the number one way to get information out of our data vaults still remains the star schema. So the star schema, if you're not familiar with that, it's a ubiquitous almost approach for ad hoc data analysis. It lets us slice and dice the data by dimensions. It really is the lowest maturity thing that we can do, and it's easy to get the data out. If you just want the transactions in a star, it's fairly easy to do that. We can do that very quickly. The question that I try to get people to think about in their star schemas is, are we storing just, representations of the data that we have in the source system, or are we storing any answers in our star schema? That's the more mature star schemas. You're actually storing your KPIs in them. You're storing your calculated answers to questions in different structures to make it more efficient for people to informate the data that they have. So how do we build a star schema? One common way that we see, and I'm not suggesting that this is the best way, but it is a way that many organizations take, is they'll look at an existing star schema, because star schemas have been around since the 90s, right? So we've got something already in place, and all we're trying to do is underneath the covers, we're trying to refresh the plumbing, if you will, the infrastructure, the technology around that. We can't get our star schema built in time, and we can't get it changed in practical time, but we like it. So we set up a reverse engineering project whose success criteria is that I can produce the same star schema that is in place today. And that allows me to compare those things and move forward. This is kind of tedious, I guess, in a way, because what you really need to do is reverse engineer the business rules that are in place for that. One thing that and I have a caution there, I think one thing you really want to avoid is taking star schema data as source data. Really, that's not the best practice. That's taking rules that you're using data that's already been changed, and you don't know how it's been changed, and that can lead to some significant challenges as well as some significant exposure from risk perspective. And at the conference this year, there was a lot of discussion about what happened with Enron, and this is sort of an example of Dan was asked to build a star schema, build a new data warehouse, and we'll just give you the data from this already massaged data set. That's not a good idea. Make sure you go back to the actual data so that you are auditable for that. Hopefully and luckily you might get a greenfield new design. How do you go about that? I think the best way to do that, and this is one of the things that I don't see enough of, I think, is the raw data mart. I started using this many years ago, 15 years ago, and it's a way in which you can generate from your raw data warehouse, from your data vault model, hubs, links, and satellites, you can generate dimensions and facts. There's an algorithm that you can create to do this. We've got this at PG2 in Warescape that we can use. And you can select different components of it. You run it through the algorithm, and what you get are maybe not the perfect, but you get a set of star schemas that have no soft business rules associated with them. You can give them to your business users who are just itching to get the data. This is the best success story I've had with that, is they just want the data. Because the data was not available to them, They just wanted to see it. And once they saw this data, they were very anxious to go out and create their own models and do their own things with it. And we were effectively done. They used a BI tool, a good BI tool, good people with good skills came up with the modeling inside that. And we really never had to go back and do much with our data warehouse. The other way that I've seen this used effectively is as a start point for gap analysis. So this is your star schema if you don't tell me anything else, right? If you don't give me any rules or any filters or any calculations, here it is. Oh, and immediately business users they'll struggle telling you what they want, but they have no difficulty telling you what they don't like. And this is a case where we can use that to iterate away from the simplistic to a more, in tune version of the data warehouse. So raw data mart, that can be used sort of I guess a variant of that is something called the unified star. I don't have any direct experience with it, so I haven't tested it. I've got the book, read the book. It seems simple enough, and it's kind of like I look at it as a mega bridge table. And I think using this approach, using our tools, we could create a unified star by just selecting all of the links and all of the hubs, put them all together. I haven't tried it, but that's, again, a highly automated way of doing this. And automation, again, shrinks the timeline to value, and that's what we're trying to really accomplish. So if you don't have that, you can use the Kimball Data Warehouse Toolkit version 3. I think it's a little bit tired because a lot of the time that Kimball spent back in the 90s and early 2000s, we're really fighting this battle, this holy war against the Inman and Kimball approach to things. And I think everybody on this call, if you're using Data Vault, you're sort of sided with the Inman-Lindstad approach to things. So much of the Data Warehouse Toolkit is not necessary, but there's good stuff in there as well. I think a fresher version of that is the Agile Data Warehouse Design book. Lawrence Core, wrote this book, as well as offers training. We've taken the training at PG2 with some customers, and it's very useful. We have adopted this process. Again, it's designed to build yourself a star schema. However, Lawrence understands that the principles around that, if you already have your data warehouse in place, you don't have to go through some of the steps. So we call it a mini beam. We take the good parts out of that and focus on defining our conceptual model and understanding what's going on in the business. So that's a really good resource as well for creating your star schemas. When we talk about linking your data together, how do you do that? You can use a property graph, or you can use a knowledge graph. A property graph is simply nodes and edges and properties in the form of a key value pair. It's kind of informal, but it's very useful. They use this type of thing. This is from a paper that they used to unravel the Panama Papers, that all of the entities that were in that. You can do that kind of thing with a property graph. Very useful, easy to get data out, less formal. The knowledge graph is a lot more formalized. It's a formalized version of your ontology using language RDF, which is a resource data format. Very useful. I talked about this at the conference last year, and it takes a little bit more effort to get to, but it also it gives you an ontology around that. And with the properties that you have in RDF graphs, they call it inherent composability. You can merge together different, when you've got the same thing, the same universal resource identifier. Like I use the ancestry.com example of that. If I do my ancestry of my people, and then my cousin has done his, and he's got me and I've got me, and if it's the same me, those two graphs merge. And that's a great way to expand the capability and knowledge that you have around your data sets and your ontology. All right, so let's move on, and you can look at my last year's presentation at the user group if you want to know more about that. I want to finish up here with a little discussion on the enterprise ontology, where you can do this. This is, Data Vault is a business concept-oriented solution. It's semantic meaning that we have to organize our data by. And how do we do that? How do we create a concept model? At a minimum, we need that. We can use the formal approach, and I talked about this last year. You can get down to very, very detailed ontologies of your business. You can buy these, or you can implement them and develop them, or you can use a more informal approach to it using concept modeling that is really just enough. And it fits well with the Agile approach to it. And I think really is Data Vault 2.0 table stakes. If you don't have a concept model and you're building a data vault data warehouse, your raw data vault becomes your concept model, really. And what this does is it's sort of a stopgap to prevent this proliferation, I guess, of source system data vaults. Source system data vaults are not integrated, and you're using the technical keys inside each source system around that, and you're not deriving the benefit of integrating semantic meaning across your organization. So if you have a concept model, you can begin to use those concepts. As you'll see, they become the hubs in your system, and those hubs are where you integrate semantic meaning. So I think this is really important. Yeah, I would encourage you to read, guys. Alex Sharp is a wonderful guy who talks about this, blogs about this, couple of good videos around that. Ronald Ross, John Giles is in the Data Vault community and has produced a couple of books around this. So there's Ron Ross's book. John has been writing about data modeling for years. The Nimble Elephant was a great book talking about reusing existing fragments of data models. Once somebody's done the data model, there's only so many different ways that we all can describe something. So reuse components of that. And then he expanded that into the elephant in the fridge, which is a data vault specific around that, and suggests a high level ontology that we can begin to start layering a concept model upon our use cases. What you want to do with that, and I think Ronald Ross is sort of the thought leader in this world, is define unambiguously the terms and the rules that you have and get that controlled vocabulary so that you can use this not only to build your data warehouse and what your hub should be, but also as a communication artifact. If it comes from the business, and this is how the concept model should arise, really is through conversations with the business. And then use that to communicate. I've worked on projects where we take the concept model and it gets posted in the team meetings, in the war room, in the lunchroom, by the elevators, and people start relating to it. It's really, really powerful. It gives you this controlled vocabulary as to get understanding. And last year, there was some really good presentations on some of the other user groups talking about ways in which you should do this. This is really the way to get your business understanding and your business concepts. There was some presentations on a tool called Ellie.ai, which is a wonderful way to do that. You don't really need a tool. I think you can use Visio or whiteboards or lucid charts. The technology is not the limiter here. It's getting that metadata, that understanding of the concepts that's required. So a conceptual business model is a description of the business in terms of what, not how, where, when, why. It's really about the what, the things in your business that they need to maintain records of and keep track of. The elements or entities and facts about those things, right? Later on, we can fill in some of the key relationships and attributes about these things. And there's really a finite set of these things. And then finally, any really essential policies and rules governing these things and facts need to be discussed in a concept model to do this properly. But you start with the terms and you end up with a controlled vocabulary. When somebody says, here's a KPI, we know exactly what that is. We know how it's calculated and where it came from. It's very, very powerful and useful. It goes a long way to help disambiguate what we're trying to accomplish there. And Ronald Ross, there's a quote there from him. It's a communication tool to make sure we're talking about the same thing. So the things that we are talking about here are what become the hubs in your raw data vault. So what do you mean by it? And we try and refer to them as with a singular noun. We can discuss one of them, but we have multiple occurrences that are uniquely identifiable. They have a business key. They are different. And we have facts and data recorded about them. There aren't that many of these in your business. They're acted on by processes. We do stuff to them. So it makes sense in a verb-noun pair. And oftentimes what we're recording as attributes is the state of these things. So what we try to do is define what these things are. and then spend a little bit of time. There's a whole presentation I've got on this particular thing about developing this, but you want to look for counterfactuals and examples and surprises around some of the things that we have to keep track of and the way that we do that in the business. And that helps us then move down into the next layer. So we start with hubs or things, and then we move down into relationships, which are termed the unit of work in our business. At a conceptual level, some of the high-level events in the business need to be drawn as lines between the different concepts in them. And that's as far as you really need to go at the high level. And you can use existing, John Giles has a great one, schema.org, KPPDS, Iridium. There's all kinds of top-level ontologies that you can sort of fit yourself into. And if you want to know more about concept modeling, the U of A, and that's the University of Amsterdam, not Alabama or Alberta. It has a 3.5-hour YouTube, free to you way to go through and understand how to do this. It's really, really useful. So let me conclude here, and I'll summarize. I think really my takeaway from here is the conceptual model is a must and a prerequisite for being effective in getting information out. When you talk to your business, you need to be talking about the same things, the same semantic meaning, and the same grain. The stuff we talk about in the class is really important to be talking about with your business at the right level. So Data Vault 2 is a system of business intelligence, right? It's a system of BI with many, many choices for informating. We don't really tell you how and what to do to informate your data. The business vault is there, and we've got some patterns for you to get there faster, but really it's an open canvas. So you need to understand what the intention of the business is. What's the story? It all begins with a story. And the story that I think you should focus on, if you don't know it, is why are you doing business intelligence? What is your business leadership trying to achieve with this? And how can I best do that? Sort of paraphrasing what Henry Ford said, it's a two-step process. Find out what they need and give it to them. And that's really as simple as that, right? You need to understand what the story is so that you can do that. And then information delivery can also be used to store answers, not just the data. Don't think you're done by making a star schema that has all your transactions in it organized, but because that's really not the whole job. The whole job involves understanding how can we make better decisions by storing the answers to some of the questions that the business is asking. Oftentimes those are in KPIs. They might be in a set of features that you have to input into a model to predict and prescribe what to do about them, but there's much more than just the raw data in a different form in your information delivery area. And the maximizing the value, I think, means moving up that DIKW pyramid up towards wisdom, where you can use the knowledge that you gained. And really, incremental is the way to do this. Minimum value increments is the iterative path towards BI success. With Data Vault 2.0, we want to just satisfy stories over and over again so that the story ends with a happily ever after. And that's all I've got today to talk to you about. And I'd be happy to, I know we're running out of time here, but I'll hang on for a bit if there are any questions.